The morning had begun like any other in the dusty town of Dry Creek, a sunburned settlement where every shadow hid a secret and every soul carried a story. The sheriff, Thomas Hale, was sipping black coffee outside his office when he heard the shout. "Sheriff, someone's talking your horse." The words cut through the lazy hum of the street like a whip crack. In an instant, Thomas dropped his cup, hand darting to his revolver. But what he saw next stopped him mid-stride. His prized stallion, a golden mustang named Brimstone, tore through the main road in a cloud of dust, and on its back was not an outlaw, nor some cocky drifter, but a frail Apache woman, her long hair tangled by the wind, her hands trembling on the reins as if she barely had the strength to hold on. The townsfolk froze. No one moved. No one spoke. The sight was so strange it almost seemed like a mirage. The woman's clothes were torn, her feet bare, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She wasn't stealing like a thief, she was fleeing like a ghost. For a moment, even the sheriff didn't reach for his gun. He watched as she guided the horse toward the open desert, swaying in the saddle. Desperate and weak, the onlookers muttered among themselves, "She's one of them Apaches, probably lost her mind. Best shoot her down before she comes back with her kind." But Thomas didn't listen. There was something about the way she rode, not wild, not reckless, but as if she carried the weight of something far heavier than guilt. He saddled the nearest horse and followed her, not with anger but with a cold curiosity burning in his chest. The desert sun glared down like a punishment, and dust filled his throat as he rode after her tracks. He could tell by the way the hoof prints wavered that she didn't know how to ride well, that she was frightened and exhausted. He could have caught her within minutes, but he didn't. Something in him wanted to understand why this woman had chosen his horse, out of all the ones in town, to escape on. When he finally saw her at a small figure in a sea of gold and heat, he slowed his pace. She was near the edge of the canyon now, the land dropping steeply into red rock and shadow. The sheriff called out, "Ma'am, stop before you break your neck." But she didn't turn. The horse stumbled on loose gravel, and with a cry, she fell. Brimstone neighed and stopped a few feet away as she lay in the dust, gasping, clutching her chest. Thomas dismounted and approached slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth. When she saw him, she tried to crawl backward, shielding herself with her arms. "Please," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't kill me." Her words struck him like a bullet to the heart. He'd been called many things in his time, a lawman, a fighter, a man of order, but never a killer of the helpless. Kneeling beside her, he saw her hands calloused, bruised, and bleeding from gripping the reins too tight. Her eyes, dark and hollow, met his for only a second before falling to the ground. "Why'd you take my horse?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, tears glistening in the corners of her eyes. "My son," she finally said, pointing weakly toward the canyon. "He broken bar, he dying. No walk. I need fast horse." Thomas looked in the direction she pointed and saw nothing but stone and shadow. But the desperation in her voice was undeniable. She wasn't lying. He holstered his gun and took a deep breath. "You could have asked," he said softly. She shook her head. "Your peoply broken bar no give." That simple truth hit him harder than any insult ever could. He'd lived long enough to see what settlers had done to her kind at the burned camps, the fenced rivers, the children gone hungry. He reached into his canteen and handed it to her. She hesitated, then drank as if each drop might save her life. When she tried to stand, her knees buckled, and he caught her by the arm. "Where's your boy?" he asked again. "Show me." She blinked, uncertain, then nodded faintly. Together, they walked toward the canyon's edge, the sheriff leading the horse beside them. Behind them, the town of Dry Creek faded into the shimmering heat, its judgment and whispers lost to the wind. Ahead waited something neither of them fully understood, a test of mercy, and perhaps, a chance at redemption neither expected to find in the heart of the desert. The sun had begun to slip behind the canyon ridge, turning the sky the color of dying embers as the sheriff followed the widow deeper into the rocky gorge. Each step echoed with weariness and purpose. The air grew cooler, but the silence between them felt heavy, stretched out with unspoken pain. The Apache woman, she later told him her name was, stumbled often, one hand pressed against her ribs, the other clutching the reins of the sheriff's stallion as if afraid he'd change his mind and take it back. Thomas walked beside her, his hat pulled low, watching the trail, but more than that, watching her. Every movement, every shiver told him more than her words ever could. She wasn't running anymore, she was surviving by inches. When they reached a narrow bend, Tala pointed to a small cluster of stones and brush beneath the ledge. "There," she whispered. Thomas's eyes adjusted to the dim light and found what she meant: a small boy, frail as a shadow, lying still on a blanket of dry grass. His lips were cracked, his chest shallow with fever. Thomas knelt beside him, setting down his canteen. The boy's eyes flickered open for a heartbeat, then closed again. "How long's he been like this?" the sheriff asked. "2 days, Tala murmured, her voice breaking. "No food, no water, no medicine." Thomas exhaled slowly, glancing around the canyon for anything useful. He tore open the saddlebag and pulled out jerky, bread, and the last of his coffee grounds. He poured water onto a strip of cloth and pressed it gently to the boy's lips. "You shouldn't have tried crossing the desert," he said quietly. "He wouldn't have lasted another night." Her reply came in a whisper. "I had no choice. My people gone. The white soldiers came, burned everything. I hid my son. Boat to broken bar, we had nothing left." The words hung between them like smoke. Thomas had heard stories, but to see the proof lying before him as starving, Sarina was different. He felt a knot in his chest that no badger gun could ease. "He's burning up," he said. "Needs shade and clean water." He glanced at the canyon wall. There was a trickle of moisture seeping through the stone, a sign of a spring nearby. He led his horse closer and filled his hat with water, carrying it back like an offering. Tala watched him in silence, her eyes were yet softening. When he handed the water to her, she cupped it in her hands and gently poured it over her boy's lips, whispering words in her native tongue, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a promise. As the minutes passed, the boy stirred, his breathing easing slightly. The sheriff felt relief creep into him like a quiet tide. He wasn't a healer, but for now, that small mercy was enough. He built a fire, the smoke curling up against the canyon walls, and shared his food. Tala ate little, focusing instead on her son. Her hands trembled as she tore bits of bread for him, her eyes glistening with both exhaustion and hope. Thomas watched her across the flames. The woman who had been a thief hours ago now looked like the truest image of courage he had ever seen. "You said your name's Tala," he began after a long silence. She nodded faintly. "Means wolf." "Fitting," he said. "You fight for your own." She looked up, startled by the softness in his tone. "I steal, and you do not hang me." "Why?" she asked, her English careful, halting. Thomas stared into the fire for a long while before answering. "Because not every wrong deserves a rope." He paused, voice low. "Sometimes it just needs a reason." For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips, as so fleeting it could have been imagined. They sat without words after that, the fire crackling softly, the night alive with distant coyotes. The sheriff looked up at the sky, a wide stretch of star-set, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. He'd spent his life enforcing the law, drawing lines between right and wrong. But tonight, sitting beside a woman who'd crossed those lines for love, he began to see the gray between them. When the boy finally slept, Tala whispered, "You good man, Sheriff." Thomas shook his head. "No, ma'am, just trying to be." She didn't argue. She didn't need to. The quiet between them said enough. And as the flames died down and the canyon sank into darkness, the sheriff realized that the desert hadn't just tested her up, it had tested him too. And mercy, for once, had won.